story of Sodom and Gomorrah. Two angels made their way down to Sodom and happened upon Lot at the entrance of the city. He offers his home as lodging, so the strangers didn't spend the night in the square. After a good meal and good conversation, a mob of men surrounded his house, demanding that Lot give them over for relations. Lot refused, offered his virgin daughters, the mob got angry, and the angels stepped in to save the day. The city was destroyed, something about a pillar of salt, and the only logical conclusion is that the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah is inhospitality. Surprised it isn't homosexuality? Well, let's take a closer look. Back in Genesis 18, angels visited Abraham and warned him of Sodom's impending doom. The outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah was so great and their sin so grievous that God would send angels to verify the complaint. It wasn't just that the cities were sinning, they were committing sins against others that were so abhorrent the people cried out for justice. After the angels declined Lot's invitation to stay at his home, he insisted so strongly that they did go with him. This is like your annoying great aunt who doesn't understand healthy boundaries and keeps asking, when are you getting married? When are you having kids? I should introduce you to the nice man I met at the coffee shop last week. He seems like a nice gentleman. Like, fam, I'm not even seeing anyone. There is a cultural aspect to this, sure, but to be so insistent they had no choice but to go with him? Why would Lot pressure them so intensely? With the outcry against Sodom so great, Lot would see what that outcry was. And whatever it was made him so afraid that the angels would be in the square at night, and he couldn't let that happen. The whole city heard about the strangers staying with Lot, and all the men from every part of Sodom, both young and old, surrounded the house. All of them, even Lot's soon-to-be sons-in-law. And what did they demand? For Lot to bring them out so they could have sex with them. Now let's say the angels stayed in the square for the night instead of following Lot to his home. The mob of men would still know the strangers were in their town, and instead of surrounding the home, they would have surrounded the very vulnerable angels in the middle of the city with no one to help or advocate for their protection. And if the angels said no to their demands for sex, what happens then? The story of the Levite and the concubine. A Levite, his concubine, and his servant were traveling to Jerusalem, made their way down to Gibeah, and happened upon an old man in the city center. He offers his home as lodging, so the strangers didn't spend the night in the square. After a good meal and good conversation, a mob of men surrounded his house, demanding that the old man give the Levite over for relations. The man refused, offered his virgin daughter and the concubine. The mob didn't listen, and the Levite stepped in to save the day by throwing his concubine to the wolves, where she was violently abused so severely that she died on the doorsteps of the house. Sound eerily familiar? Now, the angels weren't helpless women, and they were certainly capable of holding their own. But if the angels were the average Joe, who were then surrounded by an entire city of men who were hell-bent on having sex with them, I don't think they would have been given a choice. And that would definitely warrant an outcry to God. But Lot was there to advocate for them, even earning Dad of the Year award by offering his virgin daughters as replacements and having their first experience with intercourse be traumatic abuse by an angry mob of men. But the mob refused, and the response was, who the do you think you are? You think you can play judge? Once we're done with these strangers, we'll deal with you next. Did they want to have sex with Lot? No, they wanted to hurt him. Bad. Because how dare he stand in their way of having their way with these strangers that unfortunately found their way into their city? This wasn't about sex. It was about violence. But what about the other places in the Bible that Sodom is mentioned? Isn't it about homosexuality? The prophet Ezekiel was taken as a captive to Babylon and prophesied on the destruction of Jerusalem for her sin of prostitution. Not actual prostitution, it's all metaphorical, but I'm sure it was part of it. They built high places and created idols, worshipped them with oil, incense, and sacrificed their children to them. Their sins were so grievous, they were worse than Sodom's. Pride, gluttony, laziness, haughtiness, allowing the poor to suffer, and denying justice. Nothing about homosexuality, but there is some talk of detestable practices. And from what Ezekiel was saying, nothing is more detestable than idol worship. Jeremiah prophesied to Judah of their inevitable captivity in Babylon and specifically called the prophets and priests like Sodom to God and their inhabitants like Gomorrah. Why? They were profane, prophesied by Baal, committing adultery to God and walking in lies, strengthening the hands of evildoers so no one turns back from their wickedness. Nothing to do with sex, everything to do with idol worship. Jump to the New Testament, and Jude adds to the list of grievous sins of the city by going after strange flesh. Not same flesh, strange flesh. Because having sex with angels would definitely be strange. He also says sexual immorality, not homosexuality, which the word itself wasn't coined until the late 19th century by Caroli Maria Benkirk and wasn't added to the Bible until the 1940s, but that's another discussion for another time. And there's a whole lot of sexual immorality going on in the story. Gang sexual dominance for power, using sex as a means for control and violence. And here's a thought. Sodom neglected the poor and denied justice, so I wonder if they took advantage of the poor by forcing or coercing sexual favors, which is definitely sexually immoral. Even Jesus spoke of Sodom. He gathered the 12 disciples together and told them to go throughout Israel doing Jesus things. The catch? They couldn't take anything with them. No money, no bag, no backup plan for cold nights or empty bellies. If they were welcomed into a home, they let their peace rest on it. And if they were chased out of town, they were to leave and shake the dust off their feet, for it will be more bearable for Sodom and Gomorrah on the day of judgment. All about their reception, nothing about sex. Sodom and Gomorrah was never about homosexuality. It was about power, dominance, control, and violence. It was about denying justice, ignoring the cries of the needy, and actively causing harm to others. Sex was just one of the tools that was used for exploitation and violence. Nowhere in this story or any subsequent after was it ever said that a same-sex relationship is wrong in the context of consent, because this was anything but consensual.